By a show of hands, who woke up this morning, jumped out of bed, and say, I hope I find a conflict for myself this morning? All right. Well, there's no doubt that conflict keeps things a little interesting. Professional sports teams, or even our non-professional sports teams, they practice hard so they can play hard because they want to win. Because if you don't win, what are you?
Loser.
A loser, right. Sunday evenings, any Downton Abbey fans here? Yes. Don't we just wait on pins and needles to see what will happen with Lady Mary Crawley and which suitor she might be choosing? TV writers, movie writers, and the plot of everything they use to entertain us is conflict. We actually pay money and spend our time watching conflict. It entertains us. So there's no doubt that conflict is part of our lives. So we're here to talk about how conflict to be healthy and how we can manage it in our lives and specifically in our workplaces. This journey will start with an introspective look at what conflict competence is, our attitudes about conflict, start to work on our active listening skills because it's great if we have information, but how do we actually apply it? And speaking of applying it, we're going to practice. We're going to do a little bit of role playing today. It's a safe environment. Why not try it here before you go out into your workplace and start doing it with real people? Okay? All right. Roger Fisher is one of the co-authors of Getting to Yes, which I think a lot of you have read that particular book. It's focused about negotiation. So Roger Fisher's definition of conflict is incompatibility of goals or values between two or more parties, and I would add between groups as well, in a relationship combined with attempts to control each other and antagonistic feelings toward each other. Incompatibilities may exist in reality, or they may be perceived by one or both parties. So remember the concept of perceived conflict. It's something that's going to play throughout our discussion today. How many see an old lady? How many see a young woman? Both of you are right. You both have a different perception of that image. And those that saw one are right now probably going, trying to see the other. Once you see it, you'll see it every time. But there's an old woman and there's a young woman in that image. So the principles of conflict competence are our ability to develop and use these competencies and understand where they come from. So the first conflict competence is cognitive. It's an awareness that something is going on with us. And usually that awareness, we can ignore it sometimes, but sometimes it moves right into a feeling, which is an emotion. So what's an example of an emotion you might feel when you are feeling maybe there's some conflict coming at you?
Anger.
Anger? Anxiety. Fear. Frequently when I feel conflict, I kind of feel it in the pit of my stomach. Something's not right. So things are coming at us. We may or may not have control over it. The third part of this is our behavior skills, how we respond. We can't control what happens to us, but we can influence it based on our response to conflict. So we might just say, oh, conflict. You know, for those of you that jumped out of bed this morning, they were excited about it, which was no one. But other people, it's like, okay, there's an opportunity here, or I need to avoid it, I need to run. So we will respond to conflict in different ways, and a lot of it has to do with our attitudes. Charles Swindoll is a Lutheran pastor from California. He has a poem or a soliloquy that's titled Attitude, and this is the last part of it. I am convinced that life is 10% what happens to me and 90% how I react to it. And so it is with you. We are in charge of our attitudes. His idea is things happen to us, and they are going to happen to us. We can't control it, but we can control how we might respond. Our attitudes are something that we learn in our childhood. Think back to your family. When there was conflict, how did your family deal with it? And some of you are probably going, well, we didn't have any conflict. So maybe you denied it, or you avoided it. Maybe others had families that were really loud about conflict, or others were quiet and thoughtful, maybe sat down and had a conversation and worked through it. Sometimes conflict was very physical, and sometimes no one talked about it. So our attitudes are shaped at a young age as far as how we will deal with conflict. And we take those with us as adults, and then we take those into the workplace. And we might not even know that we have such an attitude. We just automatically respond in such a way without even giving it any consideration. So of those attitudes, we have negative attitudes and positive attitudes about conflict. What's an example of a negative attitude in conflict?
Not okay.
Not okay?
Not okay to have one.
Not okay to have. So to avoid it, deny it. Bullying is an example of negative conflict. Listening for agreement as opposed to a positive attitude about conflict is listening for understanding. So I actually have worked with someone in the past who, whenever we try to work through a conflict, would just kept talking over me until I would agree with what they were saying, right? Even though I was trying to understand, but we don't have to agree by understanding. So seeing conflict as an opportunity, taking responsibility, not always blaming other people, those are different attitudes that we carry with us, right? So once we start kind of thinking about, what is my attitude about conflict? Why do I react in a certain way? We behave differently at home compared to maybe the workplace. So when I'm at home, Mama Bear comes out. And so I will react differently if somebody's challenging one of my children. I would perhaps, hopefully, act more professionally when I'm in the workplace and be aware of my response to conflict. Right. So now we've had a chance to kind of think about our attitudes about conflict and how we carry those with us. It's also helpful to understand what the sources of conflict are. Because when we are in a conflict situation, if we don't know what it is we are in conflict over, we could be kind of spiraling around. The first conflict is a resource conflict. So resources could be money, they could be time. It's generally something more tangible and something people feel safer talking about. It's a more objective, tangible conflict. When we do mediation work, it's really easy to start talking about money, but when we are talking about other things, such as values, it gets to be a little bit more complicated. So values are the ideologies and ideals that we carry with us. They frequently is what we think help define who we are. And one that frequently comes up has to do with faith, belief, religion. We work in a very diverse workplace these days, where people have different beliefs and ideologies about who they are, and it structures how they respond in situations. But we also work in a multi-generational environment. We can have 4 different generations that we're working with. So 4 different sources for conflict. We have started off with the resource, value, power, and ineffective communication. So when we find ourselves in a conflict situation, we need to figure out what the source of that is. Well, now that you have an understanding of where conflict comes from, our own competencies, our attitudes about conflict, let's start talking about some skill building. And the first one is active listening skills. To be an active listener, you need to focus on the person you're talking with. Now, I know everyone thinks they can multitask, especially if you're of a certain generation. Put those cell phones away. When you want to give somebody your full attention, if you're doing something else, you're not. You're not giving them the courtesy of your full attention because your mind is going somewhere else. It could be an internal or it could be an external distraction. I'm going to invite you to put your brain on vacation. Take it to a hammock. When you are listening to another person, you're not listening to solve their problems, to interject your opinion, to start telling your story. You are simply there to just listen to what they are telling you. So I am a visual person. I like the idea of taking my brain and suspending it in a little hammock. It's not a little vacation. I'm just listening to what you have to say. Eye contact. We want to make appropriate eye contact with somebody when we're talking to them. Now, we don't want to stare them down, right, because that feels a little uncomfortable. We want to blink a little bit, but looking at them as it is appropriate, and then looking away. Some cultures have different views on eye contact, so also being a little cultural competent. If somebody seems like they're really getting uncomfortable with that, pick up on that, their nonverbal communication that they're giving to you. Our brain's on vacation, it's in a hammock, so listen without interrupting. Just let them talk. And then match the other speaker's pace. Now, as we've probably experienced, I like to talk fast, I like to process fast, and if there's some dead air, get a little uncomfortable. So be comfortable with pauses. Match the other person and don't hurry to fill in those spaces. That shows your awareness and your ability to be actively listening based on what they're presenting to you. Our nonverbal responses are 90% of our communication. So only 10% of the words that actually come out of our mouths are what we're communicating. So listen actively through your nonverbals. So things like, what do we do when we're listening to somebody and not interrupting? We're nodding. I heard someone say Little things that we can do to show that we are interesting. But also paying attention to what they're telling you that's not coming out of their mouth. So being aware of that. So let's practice active listening. I'm going to coach you through this, but I'd like you to turn to somebody that's sitting next to you. And we're going to practice the solar body language part here, okay? So the first piece is to squarely face your speaker. Now, not everyone feels comfortable with that, and I know when I've talked with I have two boys, we usually sit next to each other. Sometimes it's a little more comfortable, but we're kind of facing each other. So either someone across from you or somebody next to you, set yourself up. All right. The next part is the open body posture. What is the open body posture? Is this open body posture? Yeah. Well, if you're sitting under a air conditioning vent, you might be sitting like this because you're cold. However, we're warm today. So open up. Lean in to show interest. So if you're next to each other, you can lean to the side or lean in as opposed to sitting back. Yeah, talk to me. Lean in to show interest. Make that eye contact that is appropriate. So don't stare each other down, but give them your eye contact. And then be respectful for what the other person is saying to you. And this is the part where we're not interrupting. We're just listening for what they're having to say. We're not making this about us. We're making this about them. All right? So we're going to each get a chance to do this. And this is going to be your chance today to speak for 30 minutes uninterrupted while somebody listens to you. You're welcome. I just gave you 30 seconds to be listened to today, uninterrupted. I know you're going to want more. So the topic is to just talk for 30 seconds about some place that you've traveled or visited, and just talk about that. So select somebody to go first, and the other person, their job is just to listen. When it's appropriate, you may ask a clarifying question or reflect back what you've heard. So at 30 seconds, I'll call time, and then we'll switch. So practice. Wonderful discussion going on. If I have everybody's attention back, I can tell you all very much enjoyed the opportunity to talk and be listened to. Was that a wonderful feeling? Yes. Nice, thank you. So we've talked about our active listening skills, our nonverbal communication. Now, there still is the part about what actually comes out of our mouths. So I'm going to invite you to participate in responsible I messages. And our brains are tooled to communicate in a certain way. It goes back to our childhood, how we've learned to communicate. I'm going to suggest that changing the way we communicate does take practice. Just like any golfers here? So when you go to golf, and if you say, I'm going to hit into the scrub over there, usually when I do that, I do hit it into the scrub, right? But if I just say I'm going to hit it straight down the drive, I might not hit it as far as I want to go, but it's going to go down that drive. So just like with what we say, and what we do, if we decide we are going to be responsible with the messages that we use, we're going to start practicing that. So responsible message is actually, it's a formula. And this is what I have up here on the board. It's also in your packet of information. So repeat after me. I feel.
I feel.
When.
When.
Because.
Because.
And I would appreciate it if.
And I would appreciate it if.
Very good. So now we're going to fill in those little holes. So I feel, interject that emotion. What's an emotion?
Happy.
I feel happy. Upset. Overwhelmed. All different emotions. So you've now said, I feel. As opposed to saying, you made me angry. You should do this. You always do that. What happens when someone starts yewing at you? Defensive. And we generally stop listening right then and there. So unless you're going to say, you just won $1 million, or you're getting a huge raise, starting with you is really a quick way to stop the conversation and create some kind of conflict for that other person. Starting with I is not self-centered. It's taking responsibility for that communication. perception of the communication can only be held by one person. You have different perceptions of it. So by saying, I feel angry when, okay, let's work through this example right here. You made me late for work again. How can we reframe that using into a responsible I message? So starting off with I feel.
I feel frustrated.
Frustrated, great. When, what's the behavior? What's going on?
You dawdle in the bathroom.
I feel frustrated when you dawdle in the bathroom because
I need to be finished in there by 7:45.
I need to be finished there by 7:35, and I would appreciate it if, what is the solution? What do you want them to do? Don't make them guess. Tell them what you want them to do.
Respect the fact that I need 10 minutes from 7:30 to 7:45.
So that I won't be late getting to work. So I need that time in the restroom. So as opposed to saying, you just made me late for work again. I'm like, well, sorry, it's your problem. You are letting them know how you feel, what the problem is, and how they can fix it for you. So you're doing some work, as opposed to expecting the other person just to be able to read your mind and come up with their own solution. So as I promised at the beginning, we get to do a role play. So we can practice it here and see what it really feels like. And the final piece for us today is the 5-step problem-solving method. So if you haven't already figured out, I'd kind of like to have things orderly. And so responsible messages, but also, well, what do? I recognize I've got a conflict with somebody. How do I really approach them? So I call this the 5-step problem-solving method. The step 1 in the 5-step problem-solving method is when you've recognized that you are feeling some kind of conflict with another person, so that cognitive awareness, there's probably some emotion or feeling you have at that point, because something's telling you that, is to monitor your response. So cool down for a moment, but let the other party know that you want to have some kind of communication with them. So I'm going to pick on Denise here. Denise, would you have some time to talk with me later this afternoon? I want to go over something with you.
Sure.
It's like maybe 15 minutes. We'll meet outside.
Okay.
Away from folks? Okay, thank you. All right. Step 2. And step 1 sometimes is the hardest step because you actually now have to engage, right? Now you're committing to letting the other person know you want to talk with them. So if you can get past step 1, moving on to the other steps is much easier. But you have to take that initial first step. Do it when you've calmed down enough. Let them know you want to speak to them, maybe not right at that moment, so that you don't respond inappropriately and escalate a potential conflict. Step 2 is you want to set some ground rules. So Denise and I are now outside. Denise, thank you for meeting with me. You know, we talked about meeting for about 15 minutes. I've left my cell phone at my desk, so if you have yours, can you just maybe leave it on vibrate so it doesn't interrupt us? Is that okay?
Sure, no problem.
Sure. And we'll each get a chance to talk without interrupting each other.
Okay, I need to make sure that really we don't go over the time though.
Yeah, 15 minutes. That works for me too. Thank you.
Perfect.
Step 3. Use that descriptive I language. I have initiated this, so it's going to be up to me to communicate what's going on with the other person. Denise, I am feeling really frustrated with when you come back late from lunch because the boss has been getting on my case, and I'd really like to try and come up with some kind of solution so that we can both enjoy our lunch. Okay? Descriptive I language. Told her how I'm feeling, what the problem is, and what the solution is, I want to figure it out with her. Step 4, clarify your needs and their needs. So Denise, what do you think about this? What's been going on for you?
There's just so much to get done on lunch. The time goes by so fast.
I totally agree, but I love lunch. I look forward to it all day.
Yeah.
It's a good time, yes. Okay, so we've had an opportunity to express. Step 5, explore those win-win solutions and see if you can come up with some kind of agreement. So things that you could start it with. So what if we switched lunches, Denise? And maybe if I went first and then you went second, what do you think about that idea?
I think that would work every day except for Friday. And Fridays, I just need a little bit more time, but we can negotiate that.
Okay.
Does that work?
That sounds good. And you know, maybe we should check back in a week to see if this is working for us too. If that work, maybe we'll check back this time next week.
Sounds like a plan.
Great. So today we have looked at our own conflict competencies, where conflict comes from, the attitudes that we bring into conflict. We've looked at how we communicate, how much of what we have to say is nonverbal. But what we can do when we are communicating with others is be active listeners. Give them our full attention. Clarify needs, use our responsible I language, and then start practicing. Conflict is part of our lives, and most of conflict comes from the way that we communicate with each other. So being able to be healthy managers of conflict will create workplaces where we can all thrive and our organizations will flourish. Thank you.